So here at Royal Roads University, before all of our presentations, it's important to us that we acknowledge the traditional lands our university is located upon. So Royal Roads University acknowledges that the campus is located on the traditional lands of the Kusepsum and Lekwungen ancestors and families. It is with great gratitude that we now learn and work here where the past, present, and future of Indigenous and non-Indigenous students, staff, and faculty come together. This is a great time for us to test out the chat box function together. If you feel comfortable, feel free to click the chat box button. The chat box will appear and let us know, where in the world are you joining us from today? And if you know, please feel free to include traditional lands that you are located upon, or take this opportunity to learn more about the space that you are occupying at this time. We have a big thank you for our Learning and Technology program area for bringing this dream team of panelists to chat with us today about the top trends we're seeing within learning and technology today. So a quick snapshot here of all the different programming we have under the suite of learning and technology here at Royal Roads University, from our Master of Arts, our 2 different graduate diplomas, and our graduate certificate. If you have any questions about learning and technology here at Royal Roads University, feel free to connect with learn.more@royalroads.ca or email me from the follow-up from today's session. I'll be sure to get you connected. So with that, let's get our session started today. As we mentioned, we are here to talk about our top trends emerging in learning and technology. We're going to explore this topic through the lens of education, corporate training, and healthcare, and perhaps any other sectors that come up in our chat box as well. So to do this, our dream team assembled. So we have a wonderful group of women here to chat with us about learning and technology. So we'll go around in our virtual circle and learn a little bit more about everyone before we get started. So let's kick off with you, Sophia. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much, Selena, for your fantastic, warm welcome. I am joining from the lands of the Kusepsum and Lekwungen ancestors and families. I'm joining from my office here at Royal Roads University in Colwood. I am the Associate Director in the Center for Teaching and Educational Technologies here at Royal Roads. I'm very excited to be part of a dream team. It's always been a dream of mine to be on a dream team. So this is fantastic. I would describe myself as a learner, firstly, in this space, a scholar, researcher, author, and I'm also an associate faculty member here. So I also teach in the School of Education and Technology at Royal Roads, and just great, just happy to be part of this conversation. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Sophia. Christina, we'd love to learn a little bit more about you.
For sure. I'm Christina Jones. I'm also joining from Lekwungen and Songhees lands. I'm the Vice President of Operations at RaceRocks, an Indigenous-owned technology company that creates digital learning environments and immersive training solutions to advance the state of technical training for military and aerospace clients. I also sit on the board of directors for Edtech, the Victoria Innovations Advanced Technology and Entrepreneurship Council, and I'm also a student in the Mallet program here at Royal Roads.
Amazing. Thank you so much for being here. And Christy, over to you.
Fantastic. Thank you for having me join. I'm actually joining from my home in South Surrey. So that's the traditional and unceded territories of the Coast Salish, inclusive of the Kwantlen, Kaiti, Semiahmoo, and Tsawwassen First Nations. I am a Mallet graduate myself, and I'm situated in healthcare, so the context of healthcare. And my current position is as the virtual health learning consultant for Fraser Health. So that's BC's largest health authority. And my background is clinical, 18 years as a critical care respiratory therapist, which you might have heard about us most recently in the last 18 months. You now know what a respiratory therapist does. So I shifted after engaging in the Mallet program, I shifted out of clinical patient care into the corporate world, into virtual health.
Thank you as well so much for being here. So all of our panelists have touched our mallet program in some way, and that is so wonderful. Because our final member of our dream team is Dr. Elizabeth Childs, who is the program head of our Master of Arts in Learning and Technology, and who will be helping us through moderating today's discussion. So over to you, Elizabeth.
Thanks, Selena, and thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. I'm really looking forward to this conversation, and I'm so grateful to have such a lovely strong panel of women with us as we get into this conversation. As Selena mentioned, I'm a professor in the School of Education and Technology. I still refer to myself as a gypsy scholar in the sense that I spent the first 25 years of my career as a consultant in learning and technology, and at the time what was called blended learning, when people were still trying to navigate what it meant to do things in an online space and also have things happen in a face-to-face space. So I won't go on and on about me. I'd rather jump into this conversation and set the stage a little bit for all of you. I know that for many, this is you're making space for this today, so I'm very thankful for that. We're going to try to run it very much as an informal conversation. So all of you in the room get to be in the fishbowl and watch us have the conversation, but also please, as we're going along, if you have questions or something piques your interest, please just pop it in the chat, and Selena and I will just sort of try to keep our eye on that and bring that into the conversation. So as you've heard quickly in the introductions from Sophia, Christy, and Christina, very different sectors represented here: healthcare, corporate training, higher education, and of course, we are always more than the sum of our parts. So there's lots of other fingers and webs that people and networks that they're a part of. I thought I'd start us off, ladies, just talking about the types of trends or perhaps even expectations that you're seeing in the sectors you're in with respect to supporting learners in these spaces. So we've had this really interesting shift and an amplification of what we do now in learning and technology. Similar, Christy, to your comment of now everyone knows a respiratory therapist. People now are increasingly understanding what educational technology is and what a role of an instructional designer would be. So in your places of work and in your professional circles, where are you seeing, what types of trends are you seeing with respect to supporting learners in these spaces? And I'm wondering maybe, Christy, do you mind starting us off, and then we'll just sort of go around?
No, that's great. Thank you. So in healthcare, I need to be explicit in how I speak about learners, because we see learners showing up as patients, families, caregivers, but we also see learners show up within our organization as our employees. And so some of those employees are in positions where they are formally educators, right? They're clinical nurse educators, and that is their job to educate other clinicians. But some of our educators are educating patients in less formal roles. So as a diabetes clinic nurse, the expectation of me in my role is that I teach patients. And that was largely exclusively in person until we hit COVID. So I'll try to be explicit in which type of learner I'm talking about. So for our trends, what we're seeing is this expectation that you instantaneously, as a clinician, know how to teach online. And that's coming out in synchronous, right? Like we don't use, LMSs for this type of thing. It's largely, bam, COVID hit, move all your education online, and you're doing it via Zoom. And so we expect you to have the skills yesterday. So a huge amount of support and time to learn those skills, paid time preferably, is needed. A little balance of some professional development outside of the workspace is expected, but largely paid time. And those skills of facilitating learning online are quite intricate. It's practice-based. You've got to get in there and play around and muck about. Not a lot of healthcare providers are really confident in not knowing what they're talking about or doing. So they really are asking for practice time as well. So can I play in Zoom first? So I'm trying to build them a structured framework for actually simulating video visits with their patients, with each other. So that's part of one of my projects. For our learners, our patients, and our families, building basic digital literacy skills is really key. And we see that on the national level from Canada Health InfoWay. One of their key projects is supporting patients to understand what care can be provided virtually, what cannot, how they might access that, being aware of privacy, confidentiality, what pieces of health information you do not want floating on your Google Calendar and as notes in there that could be sold off to the highest bidder. And then largely across the board, I see the expectation to really support them in the change management piece of it. And so for me, that's been really vital that, our whole virtual health team embed ourselves in solid knowledge on how to support adoption through change management, right? We can put any piece of tech, here's this new platform. Here you have Zoom, you have access to Teams, but how do we support them to actually move and change their healthcare practice, connect it to their value systems of, okay, I'm good with this. I can actually create a trusting and safe relationship online with my patient. So that takes a lot of dedicated change management, sponsorship from high levels. So that's where we're really focused right now, is supporting the human side of that change.
It's so interesting. And thank you for the context between who the learners are in your setting, because I think that is such a critical piece, right? We often just assume it's one group, but often it is this diverse group that is interconnected in many different ways. Christina, I'm wondering in your setting where you're seeing some trends around learner support.
Yeah, in a similar vein, we have a few different learner groups that we deal with. We primarily make learning for military clients, and our largest client is the Navy. Right at the beginning of COVID, we won a contract with them to put their first Marine technician course into a blended model. It was the first time in the history of Marine technicians in the Navy ever doing any sort of distributed learning. And it was a pretty large undertaking because there was a bunch of resistance to change. And not only are they so very used to their campus model where that training was always happening on one coast or another, they also have their reservists who learn on a completely different schedule than their regular force people. So you had people learning in their homes across the country. And this contract kicked off on the 14th of March of 2020. So it was like the most interesting timing to do that development. And then not only do it during COVID, but have it done at a time where everybody was home, even the people who didn't ever be home before, who were always on base. So it was quite an interesting change. But one of the things that we're deeply noticing now that we've gotten to pilot of those courses is the need for building a community of inquiry for the students, so they have an ability to interact and engage with their cohort as well as with their instructors. There is an unfortunate mindset in some of the higher stakeholders that a blended model is set it and forget it, and you can just put it there and it should do it itself. Whereas you really do need instructor support, and you need to really support your learners. And that has definitely been a trend that we've been noticing, especially that dichotomy between the mindset of it should just be able to do it on its own, and the students being like, I feel unsupported.
Yeah, absolutely. There's that little tipping point, right? I mean, a community is only as valuable as its membership, but a membership is only as seeing the value if there's support, facilitation. It isn't a press go and walk away type of an experience, as we all know in our, face-to-face lives, engaging in our own communities. Mm-hmm. Sophia, I'm wondering, from your perspective in higher ed, what are you seeing in terms of support? I mean, we're sort of framing it around trends in this space right now, but feel free to extend if we need to.
Yes, thank you for that, Elizabeth. As I was listening to Christy and Christina speak, it's really interesting that I'm hearing some emergent themes. And although we are working in different contexts, we are experiencing some similar challenges, and we are experiencing some similar trends. I heard some things. I heard community of inquiry framework, which is one of the things that we touch on in our Facilitating Learning Online course that we offer here. And I heard things like we need to take into consideration privacy. Those are some of the things that we're also grappling with. In terms of trends, like you said, Elizabeth, it's a buzzword. And I kind of sometimes struggle with that buzzword because I feel a little bit like, distance and online and the integration of technologies isn't a new thing, but a pandemic is a new thing. And so we had to figure out how we would pivot within that space. And in our center, we support instructors, staff, and ultimately students are the ones who are impacted through this support. Some of the things that we've seen in terms of trends with regards to faculty is we've seen an increase in the uptake and interest and participation in our faculty development workshops that we offer. It's been a significant increase in that. We've seen an interest in exploring new tools that's coming from our faculty. And we've also seen an interest in how do we support the asynchronous, so the components that folks can do on their own time with the synchronous components. So when we bring everybody together and we're demanding of your time, how are we utilizing that time and making the most of that? So that would be, I would say, those are some of the trends I'm seeing on the faculty side of it. In terms of the student side of it, we're seeing the emergent themes that are coming out of society coming into our spaces. So things like we need flexibility, we need diversity of discussions, we need accessible spaces, we need folks to take into account our health and well-being and where we are. We need you to understand that we have a space that we're sharing with you in this classroom setting that we would have never done before. For example, you're zooming into my bedroom or maybe my living room and my little one is running around the room. There are so many different, I think, pieces of this pandemic that have been infused in our teaching and learning environments that has forced us, I think, to think differently about how we use technology. I'm going to say one last thing before I pass it back over to you, Elizabeth, is that safety piece. Safety is critical. And when we think about things like folks being comfortable with using their microphone and camera, that is, if they have the software on their systems and the internet to run it, that they're comfortable with doing that and we're not imposing on them. So there are so many other, I think, pieces that we need to keep in mind, but I'm certainly hearing these things coming from Christy's context as well as Christina's.
Thank you, Sophia. Well, and that's I think for me, that's always been the attraction of this space for me, is that seemingly very disparate sectors are wrestling with very similar challenges and issues. And so being able to look sort of across that sectoral plane, or in academic language, interdisciplinary, allows us to really learn and explore these things in a different way. I was just going to add in, because Sophia, you made me think of it, in the K-12 space recently, one of our thesis students in Mallet was working with a school district using an appreciative inquiry approach. So really looking at the strengths and opportunities that the experience of the early experience in early days in the pandemic had enabled for educators, parents, children, stakeholders, because the district is undergoing a strategic plan review. And so that happened in parallel to some of the work at the province looking at online learning and online learning spaces. And I'm leading up to actually pasting something in the chat, if I can get myself sorted here. A set of design principles for K-12 online spaces. And one of the things in there is so interesting to listen. So I'm just inserting this little piece. There's a principle around change and the need to support educators in this space around change. There's a principle around community and deep work around both in the thesis work and at the provincial level around how do we nurture and support these communities. And then a huge piece around digital wellness and well-being. And so picking up, Sophia, on what you're sharing, and Christine and Christy, I think those are really where we're seeing some of those marker points, right? And I loved how you phrased it, Sophia, about what we're feeling in our larger spaces in society is coming back into these sectoral pieces, right? That need for flexibility, the need for support, the need for wellness and well-being. So I just offer that those who are listening in, you might find that link, useful link as well. I'm wondering if we can, moving from support now, and we think about the actual learning experiences. So putting on a bit more of the designer hat. What are you seeing in the design of these spaces now, given the expectations of the learners are in some ways changing rapidly, in other ways perhaps don't have any because this is very new to them. So how are you seeing that impact the design of these learning environments that you're creating? Maybe Christina, do you want to start us off here?
Sure. Definitely designing more adaptive learning solutions, ones that can respond to the learner's needs, because you don't have as prescribed control on the learning environment that you had pre-pandemic. Pre-pandemic, we kind of knew what kind of system everybody would be at. And this is for applying to our learners. We'd know what system we were at, like what hours they would be accessing their training, what kind of internet connection they would have. And we lost that control of environment when COVID hit and we had people in every home in every different way. So designing more adaptively. So there was offline solutions. So there was like lo-fi and hi-fi solutions. RaceRox in particular is really like one of our strong points, is very high-end immersive experiences where you can actually go into digital environments. And some of that worked great during COVID, and some of it was not great if you had somebody in a place where they couldn't access that high bandwidth requirement. So it was creating more adaptive solutions where people could get what they needed when they needed it, and everybody came out with an equal ability to achieve a learning outcome, regardless of what their access point was.
Thanks for that. Yeah, I can see that. And knowing a little bit about RaceRox and the immersive simulations that you do, I can only imagine some of those initial struggles. I'm wondering, and we'll maybe go around and then you can all sort of think about this and comment on it. I'm wondering, there's always that tension, right? And you alluded to it earlier, Christina, about the expectation that you build it once and it's done, right? But when you're dealing with an adaptive environment, it's not a one and done price point. It's a very different price point to create that kind of interface. And so it'd be interesting as you're, as we continue to think about where some of those tension points have been, and the education inform, and Christy, to your point, the change management that's required to help decision makers see how to meet those expectations in a way that's funded appropriately. Sophia, maybe do you want to jump in on the changes you might be seeing in these learning environments coming out of where we are now, and the requirements from learners and others around support and engagement and interaction?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, that question. One of the things that I always caution people coming into the online spaces, don't try to replicate what you're planning to do in the face-to-face experience. Like, just put that aside, and then just kind of go back to the core of what are the learning outcomes, or what outcomes, or what are the goals. Like, go back to that. One of the things we've seen, though, is we've seen a huge increase in our data storage for videos and audio storage, and the integration of media in our teaching and learning spaces has been significant. And also the demand for web conferencing tools has been another significant increase. So I'll just give you an example. I know that our Collaborate Ultra tool, we're transitioning out of that. But when COVID happened, we had a request for 100 Collaborate rooms to be put into just in one program, like into their courses. Like, that's just to give you an example. So there's certainly an increase in that. I think, though, what I'd like to say is folks will fatigue, students will fatigue more, and learners in any context will fatigue more in that synchronous setting. And so we need to pay attention to that and how we're demanding of their time within that space. And also, I think we need to pay attention to what Christina mentioned, that some individuals may not have the bandwidth and the capacity, the technology infrastructure to run these things. And so we need to be aware of that we're providing accessible spaces So folks who can't perhaps watch that video, what are we going to provide them as an alternative? The other piece to this that I'll say is we also work with students in other parts of the world. So for example, we have folks that we're supporting in China. What things are they able to access? What things are blocked, etc. So in terms of, if I can sum this up and pass this over to Christy, I would say folks are very enthusiastic about multimedia. And so going back to Richard Mayer's multimedia principles is probably a good place for all of us to kind of go back to. Over to Christy.
Thanks, Sophia. I think I'm going to use a particular project that I've been working on to highlight what we're seeing, because I think largely the organization has grabbed onto it as the way things should be done, which is great when you start something and people go, oh yeah, that's what we need to do. So I was engaged last spring, April, May, to the diabetes clinics for their outpatient clinics for Fraser Health. Fraser Health has over 300 ambulatory clinics. So we kind of like tried to engage with all of them, get them the equipment that they needed. You needed cameras, you needed 2 monitors. The computers sometimes didn't even have embedded cameras in them. And then we tried to get them, here's some Zoom counts and tell us what else you need and go. But one of our engagements included me going completely off scope and working with the diabetes clinicians to redesign their self-management classes for their patients. So this is a class where you go, you're taught, you have diabetes. This is your new diagnosis. What now? What do you do? How do you manage that? What does healthy eating look like? What does good exercise look like for you? And they basically took in-person 3-hour in-person classes and moved them straight onto Zoom. And those were the ones that were brave enough to do Zoom. The rest of them just started doing telephone calls. That was their emergency response. So what we did is we brought in 2 patient partners, one who was a 4th generation diabetic, one who was a retired dietitian working on the Self-Management BC hotline, supporting her peers. And we completely deconstructed that program. We went back to the learning objectives. So thanks for that call out, deconstruct what's the point here, what is the goal, what's in it for your patient from these classes, and having the patient partners vocalize, that piece of content. We don't need that. Take that out. These classes can't be longer than 90 minutes. We're done after 90 minutes. That's enough, right? So we broke them into 5 1.5-hour classes with a ton of engaged activities in Zoom, annotations. You're always giving choice for each activity on how they're learning something. They can either chat, or if they're comfortable, they can annotate on the whiteboard or on the slide that we've put in front of them, or they can use their microphone. So we're using kind of universal design principles of, how can I achieve this learning outcome? And we've tested it so far. This new set, Jim Pattison's Outpatient Services Center has just started. They're on week 3 of 5-week classes, and Peace Arch, tiny little community site over in White Rock, is finished. And Peace Arch has said they've never seen such a bonded group of patients, which I was so excited to hear, because we were using a lot of social constructivism theory in how we were creating peer-to-peer connections. So that's kind of one key example of what so many other outpatient programs are now needing to do, right? Maybe they have some videos that they're happy with, that the content is still appropriate, but how they pull in snippets of those videos into active, social, synchronous environments is really going to be key. We don't have, early in COVID, our ability to access our LMS modules was completely shut off. We actually didn't have the resources, and they cut us off. They said no new courses unless the Emergency Ops Committee approves. So I luckily snuck one virtual health one under the wire that was about a quick 45-minute module, but otherwise nothing is new. So you're basically, synchronous is your only way to reach out, unless you get approval for an app, which is very rare. So that's just an example of, I think, what we're moving toward and seeing some good early results from. But the skills that your patients need on the one end, your learners need on the one end, and then your educators need on the other are highly necessary to support a really safe learning environment for making mistakes and not getting it right when you share the screen, or not getting it right when you try annotating. So working hard to support them in the fact that they're learning this in a pandemic, which is unheard of, and to be gentle with themselves.
Such great insights here. I'm just, I was thinking back as you were all speaking around, when we go back to the core of why do we even do this before the pandemic? Why did people get into Edtech or ID? What was the learning out? What was the goal of doing it? And it was really all about equity and access, right? It's always been about equity and access. And it's been, taken off course and highlighted and downgraded over the years. But at the core of this work is that notion, you go through any instructional design program. Okay, let's talk about the learner. What's your needs analysis? What's your learner analysis? Sometimes it's phrased that way. And I think one of the things that I'm hearing with my rose-colored glasses on today is that this cross-cutting thread of perhaps a greater awareness, both societal, but also in our work environments in these settings, of the needs of the learner, a greater compassion for that learner. And then what's so lovely to hear is the responsivity to that, right? The ability to be responsive and have this moment in time where, you can sneak that one in under the wire, or the LMS does get opened up and you can try something totally new. Christina, go ahead, please.
Yeah, there was, as we were talking about, just going to lower my hand there, just talking about all the different applications, to realize we're all focusing on learning remotely. And I thought about one trend in the application that's happened on the ground, or is happening on the ground with the military, that I've been noticing, is because of people not having as much access to shared spaces as much now. There is more of a demand happening for technological support for on-the-job training as well. Like, we're noticing the military leaning into different technologies to support learners on the job. Like, they're using AR glasses on ship so they can have an instructor in their ear, like pointing to the thing that they should be doing, which is a really neat application for immersive technology. But forgot to bring it up sooner because I was so focused on the remote part of learning instead of the active in-person part of learning.
Well, I think that's a really good point, and that's a great segue a little bit to our next sort of focus. But before we do, I'm not surprised, and you may all have comments on this too. I was talking to a colleague who is back doing in-person teaching, which has been her space for many years. So moving to online was very different for her. And so I was asking, how was it to go back? And one of her comments was that, wow, it really caused her to re-examine her practice and what she did face to face. And boy, did she ever miss things like a whiteboard or being able to pull up a multimedia clip right now. And she said, I'm paraphrasing, but was under the impression, or thought herself, as most of us would, I'll just, dust off what I do in the classroom and in I walk. And she had to, it caused her to pause and really think about, why am I doing it this way now, when I now know there are different tools or different things that I can use in these spaces. So everyone, I'm sure, is, wondering, pondering, we've talked about it without naming them. What about this technology business? I mean, I purposely left this part for last because we often talk about the trends in technology. And really, in my bias showing here completely, it is actually about the learning and engagement and less about the technology trends. But what are you seeing, when we think about both the remote space? So thank you, Christina, for that, but also the move back to perhaps more blended or face-to-face spaces. What are you seeing in your environments with respect to technology, but also sort of adoption of different technologies and different ways of being in those spaces? Maybe Christy, do you want to kick us off?
Sure. Yeah, I'll try and approach that. We recently launched a few months ago this lovely, lovely woman who leads our educator community of practice in-house at Fraser Health, Gail Allison. She and I co-facilitate. I actually just pop in for day 3 because I'm a bit strapped for time. She facilitates 3 full sessions to support our clinical educators. So those are the clinicians supporting other clinicians in how to teach online. And, I'm just looking at the content a little bit. She's working through fostering safety, community, and social connectedness by reviewing the community of inquiry model. She's looking at purposeful design and lesson planning, revisiting your learning outcomes. So we're seeing like globally, like maybe me coming in from the Mallet program saying like, this is where we need to go. People are adopting, and that's rolling through. Early in COVID, I think it was July last year, we kicked off a networked community of super users that were using virtual health across the organization. And I think we're about 110 strong. And that was our way of saying, okay, here's our super users, and we're going to meet, and we're going to talk about what you're struggling with and what you need from us, and celebrate your successes. And I think that was something that I was really like thrilled to see hit. And they're often referenced as, why don't we send this to the Alliance, the Virtual Health Alliance, we call them, so that we can, bounce this off them and see what they think, because they're such a diverse group of clinicians in every different program across the organization that can say, well, yeah, as a clinician, that works for me, right? And so it's being respectful to me as being respectful as a previous clinician, and not assuming that what we think will work for them will work for them. So I really like what we're seeing. The biggest thing for us when we're talking about the use of technology with our patients is the need for an evaluation of outcomes. So if I don't have a real strong set of evidence-based support behind me seeing and using technology to see a patient as compared to in person, then I'm only guessing at this point. And we've got those folks are stuck in the gray area of really playing with their practice. And we're like, actually, I can't tell you because there's no evidence yet to tell you long term. So they're sussing out what percentage and which particular patients we can see and use the technology with. Like say you're using a health app to SMS text with them, or say you're using just video visits. For some, we have studies on long-term outcomes. Virtual is as good as, if not better than in person. So I think evaluation is really important for us right now, to support the long-term uptake and settling into that happy place of how much virtual or video or, online is okay, and how much in person is really necessary to both give quality care, but also support a safe and trusting, lasting relationship with your care provider. So I hope that answers the question.
Thanks, Christy. That's great. Sophia, how about you? And I'm just also flagging in the chat, there's some questions of what about what kind of technologies? And I notice participants are all jumping in already to say, well, here's what we're using in our situation, which is great. So keep doing that. But Sophia, as you think about the technologies and some of the shifts that have been made over the year, and you were commenting earlier on the huge uptake of multimedia, video and audio particularly, and some of the challenges that brings. What would you say, going forward is going to be top of mind as you think about those aspects of the learning environment?
Yeah, that's a really good question for me. Working within an institutional context like Royal Roads, of course, we always have to have security as has to be one of our really big factors. So we need to make sure that our students are safe within their digital spaces. And we also, want to ensure that students will have the support that they will need to run any new kind of technology that their instructor may be wanting to use. One of the things that I saw, I ended up taking on some instructional design work because we were so busy when the pandemic happened, and I was able to support some instructors. So I was supporting some instructors who were teaching in Jinhua in China, and I was supporting some instructors who were traditionally on-campus instructors here in the tourism field, and everyone was so interested. Like back in 25 years ago, people would have brought their PDFs with all this print, and this is what I want to put in my online course. So can you upload this to Moodle? That wasn't happening this time around. People wanted to engage differently. It was really exciting and interesting. Instructors wanted to do a story of the week, and they wanted to do little chunked out pieces. Like I don't want them to fall asleep on me. I want this to be engaging and exciting. So that was really, really neat to see. I also saw instructors being more interested in the breadth of the capabilities of the learning management system. It's kind of like when you look at, like, for example, PowerPoint and the way we use it, there's so many different functionalities to PowerPoint. Well, it was kind of like that with the learning management system. They were like, it can do more than just put stuff up there that students read. What else can it do? And so we were exploring tools and capabilities of the learning management system. And the final piece I'll touch on is the integration piece. So how do we bring in all of these external tools into the environment? Because we know that the learning management system has some limitations. And so we were bringing in and linking in to other tools like Padlets, WordPress links, and other kinds of technologies. And folks were super excited about it. I think we're past the having just a text-based online course. Like, that is outdated now. It has to be interactive. It has to have multimedia. It has to be engaging. You have to chunk it out, and much, much more.
Sophia, thanks for that. Yeah, yay, not just text online. What a great concept. Christina, you have the perhaps envious position of having different budgets associated with the work that you do than perhaps we do in healthcare and education. And so I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about some of this piece around the technology and maybe also some of the tensions that brings.
You'd think after 18 months of doing this online, we'd all learn what the mute button is, but no. Yes, it definitely is an enviable position in military's aerospace. They are definitely innovative when it comes to the application of technology, and will part of the best use of immersive learning experiences in creating virtual environments is in those places where training in person is too dangerous, too expensive. And so creating virtual environments to, say, do electrical training so you don't have to worry about someone getting electrocuted, or big equipment training where there's only one or two in the military and somebody will never have a chance to practice until they are on site practicing and having to do it for real with millions of dollars and lives on the line. Virtual environments are perfectly suited for that sort of application. And yes, it definitely is amazing to have the opportunity to take a unique approach to instructional design and be like, wow, if we can actually do our best to replicate the feelings of being in this virtual and this real environment in a virtual world, how do we create a learning outcome, or how do we track to a learning outcome through virtual interaction? And then how do we track what we've done in that virtual environment and compare it to what's done live? How do we prove with assessment that what we've done in those virtual spaces is creating the learning and is training people to that optimal output? Yes, it's kind of neat because we also have the opportunity of replacing some of those things that are done in very old school classroom ways. We did a project a couple of years ago where we were teaching navigation sailors, the ones who drive the Navy boats. There's no steering wheel on them, by the way. How they drive the Navy boats. They were teaching essentially trigonometry. If your boat needs to match up with that other boat, the relative velocity that you have to do to get there. And previously they taught that with little bathtub boats on the floor. And then they could see where they would be in space as these ones are moving. So you have to do these angles. And we built like 3D video series that showed what that math was and was able to overlay the stuff, and the impact to the learner of being like, oh my God, I can see it now. I can see what it would be like with ships moving in space, because it's a hard thing to visualize. It's really neat to be able to apply all those high-end technologies to learning.
Well, I think it also, thank you for that. I think it also speaks a little bit to Anna's question around, when you have all these multiple technologies, and there's been lots in the chat, which is fabulous. When you have all these multiple technologies and the learner is having to hunt and peck to remember where things are and where to go for this and where to go for that. I mean, we struggle with that at times too, right? But in that immersive space where that's the container and everything comes into that container and is accessed from that container, you have a different ability for brain processing in order to create those sort of mental maps of where things are located in space, how you get there. Yeah,
it's really neat. Like if that sailor would have to press the comms button to ask for help, you can just press the comms button and the help menu will come up. Like you can put things in situation in a virtual environment that replicates real life in a way that a lot of like non-immersive spaces struggle with. Because like the user interface of life is already there. You don't have to design it. Whereas you have to design the user interface of a flat solution.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Interesting. I'm watching our time, which is uncharacteristic of me. But I do appreciate that people may have to go on and do other things. What I wanted to do, I'm just going to do a quick scan of the chat, but I'd love to give each of you a moment. I'm sure there are lots of things percolating in your mind. So just to share maybe either something that's come to you as part of the conversation that you're curious about, or some last little tidbit you'd like to share with our audience before I come back and pick up some of the chat questions for us. So Sophia, maybe would you start us off on that?
Yeah, I think this is a very, I think, complex conversation. And if we were to have this conversation again, we would probably say something else, because there's always and. So with that, there's a lot of space here, I think, for innovation and creativity. I did look at a question that was in the chat, and I was kind of interested in that question. It talked about situations when you can't include external tools within your teaching and learning space. That's an interesting one, because in my head I'm thinking, oh, why can't you? Can you hyperlink? But I don't really know the context of that. So yeah, so that would be something I'm interested in learning more about, that where that question's coming from. In terms of the space, as a learning designer, it's very exciting that I'm hearing a healthcare practitioner and someone from the military worker speaking my language. This is so exciting, because one of the things I participated in another conversation where I was asked, are instructional designers heroes? And one of the things that I said is, I think I just want to be understood. I don't know if I aspire to be a hero. I just want to be understood. And now I feel like people will actually know what we do and understand what we can bring to the table. So thanks for that, Elizabeth.
Wonderful. Well, I'm not sure that I did that or had anything to do with it, but I would totally agree. I think that one of the many beautiful gifts that this time in our collective societal lives has given is a different appreciation about learning, about creating engaging learning, and the roles that different people play in that experience. So thank you for that, Christina.
Yeah, I was just going to agree entirely. This our current situation in the world has created an opportunity of forced change management, essentially. Like people had to go online, and people had to learn, had to do things in spaces that were not their comfort zone. And people started to realize, oh no, like there's different ways this can be done. There are solutions that it looks like somebody's trying to do that thing that they used to do on a computer, and that's not working for me. And ones that were designed well and curated well for that particular experience, and people are starting to see the difference. And it's awesome. It's awesome to see people experience like quality online learning and understand that it took work, it took design, it took multiple different skill sets to put together a course that would have an impact in an online space. And it's kind of great that isn't like under the veil like it used to be. It used to just be like kind of hidden work, and now that it's out there and people understand the complexity of it, it's awesome.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's one of those things where, I mean, I used to always joke and still do that my family still doesn't know what I do, right? That it's so hard to describe and unpack what it is that people in this space do. And yet there's a growing awareness now that it's needed. And in some cases, we're still not quite sure what it is, but it's needed. But in, I think, many more cases now, it's recognized both as a valuable piece and something that you can see the distinctions between where there's been deep involvement from a variety of skill sets on a project to where it was, had to be a little more shoestring. And it's on a continuum. It's not good, bad, or ugly. It just is, given the resources available. Christy, thoughts and comments?
Yeah, for sure. Just two things I'll speak to. Just a little bit of chat about tools, collaborative tools and other tools. Oh God, in healthcare, we're so constrained, let me tell you. It's such a tight privacy and security review process. The organization, the corporation that you're using the tool literally has to have a data server on Canadian soil for me to use it. Few and far between. So Google products are off the board entirely. So I think I would go back to, and we do tend to, when we're so constrained, going back to why do you need it? What are you doing with it? Which I love, actually, because you have to deconstruct why you need that collaboration and how else I can get it. Zoom is pretty open in terms of its capabilities for us right now. But as a corporate tool, we're transitioning off of Skype and old technology to Microsoft Teams. But Microsoft Teams as it sits is very constrained. I can't access whiteboards. I can't do polls. So we're all learning what tool works for us right now, but we're also re-examining why we think we need it in the first place and how else we might be able to achieve that learning outcome, which I think is a good thing, although it is frustrating at times. And the other thing I'll speak to is what we're really trying to identify is a component of necessary learning in the flow of work. I don't get, executive director backing for dedicated practice time all the time for my clinicians, right? So yeah, oh sure, wipe the patient's slate clear for 2 hours every Friday and they'll just learn how to use Zoom. That's not happening. So how can I break down in little chunks and pieces for them, accessible bits and pieces of learning? And I've often gone to the 70-20-10 learning model, which I don't know if any of you have heard of. I'll try and find a link for you for a good video to explain, where 10% of our learning is actually done more formally, 20% in a social, hey, Bob, do you know how to do this across the office? And then 70% of it done experientially, right through that. So how can we support them so that in their interface on Teams, like if they're learning how to use Teams, what's embedded in Teams so that they can grab something and something walks them through or coaches them along? Like, where's the relevance of a coach here, whether it's a digital coach or a real life coach? And then that, understanding that learning has to occur in the flow of the work, because otherwise they don't have dedicated time for it. So I think that might be two key pieces to highlight in healthcare.
Super, thank you. Of course, as always, I feel like we could just have another half hour, go refresh our tea and come back. But I am conscious of the time. There was a question in the chat. It's a very good question around assessment, right? At the core of it, if I'm reading it correctly. And how do you know that they did it? If you send them off in a hyperlink and they go to a Padlet and they do this, or they go somewhere and do that, how do you know they did it? And it's one of those questions that I think as designers, we're constantly struggling with that tension, right? Are we creating a learning environment that caters to the aberrant 10% who are going to try to push buttons and just, be a click through? Or are we creating a learning environment that goes back to the intention? What are the goals? What is the purpose? And allowing opportunities, multiple ways and multiple modes of representing the expertise that they've created. And I think that's a challenging space. Christina, you're going to jump on and comment.
Yeah, it's just something that has come up. Before this, I put out a post on to my learning designers and I was like, anybody have any trends that they want to talk about? And one thing that came up was the need for more reliable data and a better data set coming out of learning. And things like CMI5 and XAPI, which you can collect data if you know how to collect the data, and then you know how to run a report to write the data. that whole field of learning like still needs a lot of work. There still needs to be a way that you can have things that are repeatable, that you can have standards. And it's something that our clients really want. They want to know who did what and how they did it, and like what their experience was doing it. How many times did it take them? Like more data than you can get from like a SCORM LMS package. And yeah, like that's something that's coming up a lot, is people want to be able to collect data from all over the web. Like if they go to Padlet, like what did they do? And it will run into a report. So you don't have to go to 8 places as the instructor to check it. You can run a fundamental report that gives you all your data. That is a desire, very much so.
Oh, so interesting. Selena has been doing a wonderful job. Thank you, Selena, of putting in the chat all the things that I was supposed to mention at the end. So I'll just highlight it for everyone. And thank you all for making time for this conversation. I really hope it was valuable to those who were participating and listening. I thoroughly enjoyed the chance to connect with these 3 ladies and to have those little short windows into your worlds where we can really pull the nuggets that are most useful and helpful that we might be able to share with others out there. We are doing, this is part of a 3-part series. So we're doing 2 more of these over the course of the fall. And I think we also, Selena's put it all in the chat there. We do have a webinar coming up that's specific to the Mallet programs and the diploma programs. But really, this is a way where we were hoping, and I'm so thrilled that we have current students and alum and associate faculty represented to talk about the trends in the field and to talk about the realities of this work, because I think someone had said earlier about it being behind a veil, and I love that we can take that off now, and we can just, it's no longer just pushed under a door and something comes back, or the return key is hit and something comes back. It's open and it's being discussed and shared, and I think that's a really critical piece to move the field forward and to move the knowledge forward. So thank you all for participating, for being part of the conversation. Folks who joined in, thank you so much for being part of this. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. You can email Selena, you can email myself, and we can connect you. Folks who've listened to the recording, I hope you had a lovely cup of tea as you were doing it. Thank you for doing that. I've yet to listen to one of my own recordings, so huzzah to you. But honestly, I really do appreciate the time you've given to this, and look forward to connecting on the next one. So thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your day. Take care.